Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Fantasy Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. Scott, we're doing a one-podcast week this week coming off Memorial Day, so we got a lot of stuff to talk about. But do you enjoy your long weekend?
I did. I guess my only complaint is I think everybody should play on Memorial Day. I don't know why Major League Baseball has an incomplete schedule that day. Why not take control of Memorial Day, take control of Labor Day? Those are baseball days, but weather's good. A lot of golfing going on, a lot of fantasy baseball going on, and we have a lot to unpack. So let's get into it.
We do, yeah. So we'll get our news and notes up at the top, and then Scott and I, we're now a third of the way through the baseball season. So Scott and I are going to go over some of the early season surprises and disappointments, and just kind of give you a sense of if we think these guys are for real or if you should be worried, or we'll give you some insights into our early takeaways just from our own performances, just because I think it's important for all of us to take stock at what we're doing well, what we could improve on with the management of our teams, because as you said, it's never too late in the game to say, hey, I'm struggling at this. I need to switch it up if I got to get this team, to where I want it to go. We're going to start with obviously the Ronald Acuna Jr. news. I know, by now on Wednesday, it's been discussed for a couple of days. I don't know that we're going to add anything new to the conversation. It is sad that he is out for the year again with an ACL. DJ and I were on the Q&A yesterday mentioning that, if you're in a dynasty league or a keeper league, it might not be a terrible idea to see what people would give you for Acuna. I mean, we've seen players like this who are off to, really great starts, who struggle with injuries, and their careers, the trajectory changes drastically. I mean, the comps that DJ and I mentioned were, Eric Davis, who people have mentioned a ton, and even Grady Sizemore, who, the first 4 years of Grady Sizemore in Cleveland were pretty legitimate. And injuries, tore that apart. And we just don't know the type of player Acuna is going to be on two ACL recovery knees. He'll still be good, but who knows how good.
Yeah, it's no fun. I say this a lot, no fun to play fantasy baseball as an actuary, but it's probably the right thing to do. And whenever I have a major player who suffers an injury, whether it's somebody coming back in the season for a seasonal league, or in the case of Acuna, we're thinking, dynasty and keeper and all that stuff. It's not a bad idea just to see what the market will bear, because so much of Acuna's value is the power and the speed and the lateral movement. The fact that he's already had two major injuries too. This isn't the first rodeo for him. So in a year where almost everything has gone wrong for the Braves, imagine what the Braves have had happen, right? I mean, they had the consensus best pitcher in fantasy baseball, Spencer Strider, and it seems like a long time ago, but he's obviously out for the year, Tommy John surgery, and they have the number one overall pick. You got the one pick, you're not even considering anybody else. Acuna was the smash number one pick. He goes down. I mean, sometimes this fantasy baseball season feels like a fantasy football season where the injuries are overwhelming and kind of soul crushing. The only good thing, if there is a good thing, is that at least in fantasy baseball, if you lose your best couple of players in fantasy football, there's no replacing them. At least in fantasy baseball, you start so many guys. The season is 6 months long. At least it's not inconceivable that you could have Acuna and still cash in your league or win your league. Where if you take Christian McCaffrey and he gets hurt in September, your season's probably in trouble unless you work magic on the waiver wire. So we always say stay the course, do your diligence. But I like the angle that you and DJ were saying that, in a keeper league, it's just see what the market will bear for Acuna. Yeah, you can always say no. You don't have to do anything, but just see what's out there.
And it seems like, obviously, for Atlanta, I wouldn't be shocked if they make a trade for an outfielder. I don't think that's imminent, but I think it is something down the pike. It seems like Jared Kelenic and Adam Duvall will be full-time players for the time being. Duvall, interestingly, in a part-time role so far this year, is showing career best contact rates, chasing outside of the zone less. Strikeout rate is down. If we get a version of Adam Duvall that makes contact more regularly and strikes out less, that is interesting, because we've obviously seen him be a fantasy relevant player due to his power and some chip in speed in the past. And so, yeah, I'm looking to add Duvall in leagues where I can. And I guess, Kelenic, his role doesn't change that much. He might play against more lefties, but if he's available, why not take a flyer, see how it shakes out in the coming weeks.
It kind of showed no inclination he can hit left-handed pitching. He's
right, exactly
near the bottom of the lineup. Is there a buy low in this lineup, by the way? Are you trading for Olsen or trading for Austin Riley? Other than the one guy, Azuna is the one guy you wish you drafted.
Right.
Pretty much everybody else has disappointed you, has been hurt at some point. Who was your go-get-him guy in this Atlanta lineup?
I would have said Matt Olson because he popped on an article I did on basically looking at pulled fly balls and looking at guys who deserved more power than they were getting. And as I took the leaderboard from StatCast and then started writing the article out over the course of 2 days, I think he had, 2 home runs in 3 games. And then he was no longer like a guy who should be hitting more home runs, but a guy who was hitting home runs. And so I think, he's been a top 100 player over the last 2 weeks. The batting average is climbing up a little bit. So I think maybe the buy low window on Olsen closed. If it didn't, I'd be looking at that. Austin Riley. I don't know if I got like half of that name right. It wasn't even close. Austin Riley seems to be hitting second now with Acuna out. I still believe in him, man. Like I don't believe that he just like fell off a cliff. So yeah, I'd be looking to float some buy lows on Austin Riley too. I don't really know if people are that worried about him. And then I'm still in on Michael Harris. He hasn't been awful, but he hasn't been great. And you're looking at like on Yahoo formats, he's outside of the top 200 players over the last like 3 weeks. But I still think he'll close the season as a top tier outfielder. So I'd be looking to add him as well. So I think there's a lot of buy low opportunity.
And there's so much talent here. And they were probably, depending on how you felt about the Dodgers, the number 1 or number 2 offense on everybody's hit list before the season. They obviously were just a juggernaut last year. Hitting can be contagious. I still have to feel like this is at minimum a top 10 offense, and it should be a top 5 offense. And if you told me like they were the top scoring offense from like June 1st on, I mean, everybody would believe that. There's still so much talent here. So, and also the thing with like Olsen and Riley, it's not like we'll talk about Paul Goldschmidt later, who has actually started to turn it around. But he's in his mid 30s. Jose Abreu got off to a horrible start, went to the minors. He's like 37. These guys in Atlanta are still, most of them in their 20s, and even like Riley and Olsen, they're merely at the middle of their careers. It's way too early to think, oh my God, Austin Riley does not play baseball anymore. It was frustrating that the team did let him be day-to-day for 2 weeks. I don't know why they didn't put him on the IL. I don't know why Atlanta wanted to play data man. It doesn't make any sense. And obviously, fantasy baseball managers didn't like that either. But yeah, I'm not one of these people who just assumes like sometimes a bad start is a bad season, but I can't believe that all of a sudden 6 Atlanta baseball players just forgot how to hit. That doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you on that one. The other big Atlanta news is Spencer Schwellenbach is being called up to start tonight, Wednesday night, to make his MLB debut. This is a 23-year-old kid who was a 2-way player in college at Nebraska, who made 6 starts in high A this year and just 2 starts in double A and is getting the call because obviously AJ Smith-Shawver, who was up, hurt his oblique after his last start. I didn't know a lot about Schwellenbach. I will say, he's a mid to upper 90s fastball guy with a plus slider, and some prospect guys that I trust have said that his curve and changeup have flashed the ability to be, solid pitches, but he doesn't use them all that often. I don't know. I think you and I would both agree that like we can't really tell you something you don't know about this kid as of right now. But if you're hearing this before the Braves start tonight, and you have a spot on your roster, not a terrible guy to throw on the bench and see what happens, because again, really good team context. There's some interesting tools here, and we've seen the Braves hit on some young pitchers in the past, and if it's this guy, you could get him for nothing right now.
Yeah, you hear my dog Jimmy in the background, probably barking because Schwellenbach is from Saginaw, Michigan, about an hour from where I live. So that's probably why the dog is engaged. You like that he's a second-round pick. He doesn't have a ton of data. I mean, he's only pitched 110 innings since he turned pro, but the stats are what you like to see. 2.21 ERA. The whip is under 1. Strikeout rate is okay, under a strikeout per inning, which we now, to get really excited about a pitcher, he has to have minimum better than a strikeout per inning. So that's a little bit unusual, but the control is very, very good. So that's mitigated. Maybe he's more of a George Kirby type than a dominant strikeout pitcher, but the Braves, you want to follow the organizations that are right more often than not. So why not take a chance on a guy that the Braves like, and a guy who the Braves took in the second round? That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah. In less satisfying pitching news, Christian Javier is back on the IL with some forearm tightness. He went and got imaging yesterday, Tuesday. So did Jose Urquidy. We're supposed to hear at some point today, tomorrow, about both of those guys. It seems like the Astros are very concerned about Jose Urquidy. If I had to guess, I would say that he's probably going to be out for the year. Javier may make a comeback. But this is a situation where, like, I just wanted to, obviously there's nothing, you're putting Javier on the IL. You're hoping you hear good news. I just will continue to throw out the name Eric Lauer, who the Astros signed to a minor league contract and is currently building up his pitch count in AAA. Spencer Arrighetti will get a little bit more leash here, but he's got a 6.93 ERA through 8 starts with the Astros. And if in a couple weeks Arrighetti hasn't turned it around and Lauer is, up to 5 innings in AAA, we've seen Eric Lauer be a very useful major league pitcher in the past, and he could do that again for the Astros. So just a name I want people to keep an eye on.
Sure, yeah, very relevant in 2021-22. Another guy who, it's not a great strikeout to innings ratio, but he's got decent control, and he could certainly pitch to an ERA in the mid to high 3s on a Houston team. Again, they've been underwhelming so far, but I still think they're going to be over 500 the rest of the way. So if they eventually tap on Lauer, who's only age 29 season, I want to say. So, there's still some relevance there. We're always looking for reasonable pitching. He'd be somebody, maybe in some leagues you might want to see a start. I get that, but just keep in mind how useful and how startable he was in that Milwaukee run that he had.
Yeah, you're looking at like really deep leagues. Like I would consider stashing him early on like an AL only type of league just to see. But yeah, you're not looking at anything like super shallow. The Orioles also put both John Means and Dean Kremer on the IL. We don't yet have a timetable for John Means. Dean Kremer is said to be start up throwing this weekend. He just had triceps inflammation, so they hope that he'll feel good when he starts throwing and work his way back into the rotation without too much delay. The Orioles brought back both Cole Irvin and Albert Suarez, who they had moved to the bullpen into the rotation. Just want to know if you have interest in either one of these guys. It does look like they'll be in the rotation, and especially if Kremer is not out for a long time, we probably won't see Cade Povich, the prospect that everybody wants the Orioles to call up. But are you in on either Irvin or Suarez?
Yeah, it seems like a theme of the day where all these pitchers who don't strike out guys, that's who Irvin is, right? 6.4 strikeouts per 9. I realize the 2.84 ERA doesn't jibe with his metrics. His ERA per FIP says 3.45. Some of the other estimators are in that neighborhood. But the bottom line is he's somebody, every time he pitches, I think he can probably go 6 innings and allow 2 or 3 runs. He's backed by a decent Baltimore defense and obviously a very good Baltimore lineup. And even when he got moved out of the rotation, it's just one of these things. Every team in baseball knows they need 7 or 8 starters. Eventually somebody gets hurt or somebody needs some load management. So when guys get moved out, if they've pitched well to that point, a lot of times I just wait a week or 2 to see what happens. And maybe in leagues where I might have rostered Irvin and just continued to hold him and just see if anybody needed some time off. And ultimately that's what's happened here. So I know, again, I know it's hard to say, oh, this guy pitches to contact. I don't want that, but it's been such a bad year. Joe Sheehan was talking about this in his newsletter, I think today, about how contact in baseball is not fun the way it used to be. All the numbers are depressed. There's speculation. Maybe the ball is a little bit mushy. It's not springy and all that stuff. So maybe these pitch to contact guys aren't, it used to be, oh, you can't do that. You pitch to contact, you can allow a bunch of home runs, you get knocked all over the park. It's not that big of a deal to pitch to contact anymore if you're hitting your spots, if you're not living middle. And I think that makes guys like Cole Irvin kind of sneaky relevant in today's fantasy baseball.
Yeah, I prefer him to Suarez. Suarez has, been the talk of the town in some respects because he came out of nowhere. I just don't trust the four-seamer as much. And I think, having that lefty in the rotation in Irvin makes some sense. The Rangers welcomed back Wyatt Langford and put Evan Carter on the IL with a back injury. I think this is honestly the best case scenario for Evan Carter because now you can stash him on the IL. He was not hitting well, and I think a demotion seemed likely for him. I know I have him in a couple leagues with IL spots, and I'm happy to put him on the IL because I believe in the talent, but he was not producing. Wyatt Langford, if he was dropped in your league, was probably scooped up when he started, the rehab assignment. So I don't know that there's anything really actionable here. I wanted to lump that into the conversation that the Astros demoted Joey Loperfido when they decided to bring back Jose Abreu. It's a conversation for another time, but Loperfido, yes, the strikeout rate was high, but I wouldn't go so far as to say he struggled. Like, he was still hitting the ball. The power wasn't there. The average was fine, but he disappointed, quote unquote, in terms of what fantasy managers were expecting when he was on the wire. And that adds to a growing list of prospect hitters who have disappointed for fantasy in this early on in the season, like Jackson Holliday and Jackson Chourio and Evan Carter and Christian Encarnacion Strand and Wyatt Langford and Ceddanne Rafaela and Zach Geloff and Parker Meadows and Henry Davis and James Outman and Michael Bush and Brett Beatty and Andrew Vaughn and Spencer Torkelson, and the list goes on. And I just wonder if we need to maybe reevaluate how aggressive we get with these prospect hitters. I think there's a very clear gap between AAA pitching and Major League pitching. It might be growing. That gap might be widening. And so I just don't know that we can just say these guys are going to come up and hit anymore. I think we have to treat them as riskier assets.
That's such a great point. If you look at the current favorites for Rookie of the Year, it's dominated by obviously the Japanese pitchers. Imanaga and Yamamoto have been very good, but they really shouldn't. I don't even think they should really be rookie eligible because Japanese baseball is so good. It's a major league in itself. And then Mason Miller, of course, the relief pitcher for the A's, is just fabulous. Anytime he pitches, you want to run to the TV. But what hitters do you wish you had? In fact, Carter and Langford aren't even that far down the odds. That's how bad the AL rookie class has been. Colton Cowser's been good. He's kind of been up and down. It's not like if you missed out on Colton Cowser, it's ruined your season or anything like that. And maybe, and I admit, look, I usually, my strategy for years was just somebody in my league wants the rookies more, I'll pass on them. This year I did get a Jackson Holliday share, and I was excited when he came up. He was hitting great in AAA. He's just 20 years old. He's going to be great eventually. Churio's going to be great eventually. It's funny, you talk about Langford. He was, and I don't mean to kick a guy when he's down, but, Angel Hernandez obviously announced his retirement. And they have these long video clips of just pitches that he got wrong. And I think there's a at bat for Langford where he called 3 pitches out of the strike zone strikes. It's like, okay, welcome to the major leagues, Wyatt Langford. Granted, every player in baseball can probably point to, every batter in baseball probably has an Angel Hernandez moment. I joke that when Trevor Bauer threw that pitch over threw the ball over the center field wall, and Francona was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I think Angel Hernandez called that a strike. But fare thee well in your retirement, Angel. But man, this list is just depressing.
It's a little sad. It
is a little sad, and it's maybe. What's going to happen is there's going to be a correction next year, and then it's going to be like, there's going to be some year. It may not be next year, but it's going to be a correction, and then we're going to have some rookies be really good right out of the way, and it's going to be, oh, wow, did we miss the buying opportunity on rookies? But I think what's going to happen is next year. It
might be some of these guys again, right? Like, it might be Victor Scott next year. It might be, Joey Loperfido next year. It might be, I'm trying to think of other, the other guys we mentioned here. It might be like Christian Encarnacion Strand next year, Geloff. Who knows? Like, these guys may just be really undervalued in drafts. And
that's the whole post hype idea, right?
Yeah, the post hype. Yeah, and there are no hitting prospects on the horizon that make me go, oh man, like this guy. Like, it's Caminero, it's Kobe Mayo, it's probably Orelvis Martinez for the Blue Jays, who are the guys who are like on the doorstep where you're like, they could make a real impact. Beyond that, it's a lot of question mark guys. I think, there are going to be guys who pop, but I think it might be like if you used your waiver money early on, you're feeling good about it, but it depends who you added, because it may have been for some of these guys who aren't doing anything.
for sure. And of course, on the pitching side, there's plenty of hits. I mean, Skeens has been really fun. You pointed to Jones a long time ago. I know he's allowed a few runs in the start today, but those two Pirate guys look really good. And again, I don't count the Japanese pitch. Not that they don't count; they're wonderful. And you pinpointed Imanaga as a great value before the season, but it's just different because they have such a high level of experience that I feel like we're not comparing apples to apples. But at least we've seen some pitching hits for the rookies, but it's been really difficult for these offensive guys.
It has, yeah. Ke'Bryan Hayes and DJ LeMahieu are back. Do you have any interest in either of these guys? They're third base eligible at a position that's a little bit difficult right now. Do you care?
Maybe Hayes a little bit. I know you went granular with Hayes before the season and outlined some pretty good stuff on him.
It didn't pan out.
And it hasn't popped. And he's always been a player I wanted to like because he's so good defensively. And he's one of those guys that I think he's probably underrated in the real world because, again, the defense is so good, but maybe he's just never going to be anything more than a slightly below average offensive player. With LeMay, who's just a little bit too old now, and there's just no more explosion in his bat. He's an easy fade for me. I'm out on Hayes, but, I'll admit, and this may sound kind of flimsy, but like the first time he goes like 5 for 11 in a series, I'll be like, I'm backing on Ke'Bryan Hayes because he's just a player I like, but I can't. I like him in my heart. I can't like him rationally with the data.
I kept him in some 15-team leagues just on a hope and a prayer, and we'll see how the next few weeks go. LeMahieu, I agree with. I'm out, especially because his value was tied to leading off. The Yankees aren't going to bump Volpe from that spot, and so LeMahieu for me is a no-go. A couple of quick hitters here, just for the news and notes. Nathan Eovaldi was back yesterday. He didn't even throw 40 pitches. It looks like he's just going to be. He didn't do a rehab assignment, so it seems like he's going to be ramping up in the big leagues. That might mean you got to keep him on your bench for the next few starts until he gets up to like a workable pitch count, where you feel like he could actually get a win or something. But he is back. Nick Lodolo is back, which is really nice to see, and had a good first start against the Cardinals. Lane Thomas is now back for Washington. That led to Victor Robles getting designated for assignment. I know he never panned out, but it might be interesting to see where Victor Robles lands and just see if some organization is able to make the most out of his raw tools. Lane Thomas being back seems, after 2 games, like it has put Joey Meneses in a short side platoon with Eddie Rosario, who will play against righties, and then Meneses will play against lefties. So we'll see how that shakes out. TJ Friedel is back as of today, starting leadoff again for the Reds. That kind of looks like an easy swap for Jacob Hurtubise, who was leading off for the Reds lately. Josh Lowe claims he's going to be back next week, that he got good results from the imaging on his oblique. He has now hurt or had a setback on this oblique 3 times in the year, so I don't know how much we trust him continuing to be healthy, but he says he's going to be back, and that's great. Francisco Alvarez is starting a rehab assignment this week, so that's really good. Mets catcher looking like he might come back before the deadline or before his timeline. So if you can stash him if he was dropped anywhere, now might be the time. Also, Sean Murphy, the catcher, has already come back for the Braves. I wouldn't go ahead and drop Travis d'Arnaud yet because I think they might split some time early on. So we'll see how that pans out. And then your Tigers, Kerry Carpenter on the IL with lumbar spine inflammation. And they have said there's no timetable for his return right now because they need to do some additional testing. I think you have to put Carpenter in the IL spot until we get a better sense of the timing. But that is unfortunate. Lamont Wade Jr. went to the IL for the Giants. That looks like more playing time for Wilmer Flores. And Michael Conforto is going to start his rehab assignment this week on Thursday or Friday. That's something to keep in mind because if Conforto comes back, that looks like it might be the end of the line for one of Luis Matos or Helio Ramos. We don't really know who that will be or how that will be, but it looks when Conforto comes back, there's really no other spot because Yastrzemski is one of the outfield spots. Soler is locked in at DH. So it looks like one of Matos or Ramos will be done.
Right, which is a shame because they've both been productive. Let me just tap a piece on Carpenter. So finally, this is a platoon guy who finally had a week of all right-handed pitching, and he never even gets to attack it because he's on the IL. They were obviously rained out Tuesday, doubleheader Wednesday. The Carpenter news comes down, so that's frustrating. But one player this may help a little bit just to lock in a spot is Winsell Perez has been really interesting player. He's off to a 276, 346, 457 slash. That's a 127 OPS plus. He's got a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. He's walking, he's batting leadoff. And last I checked, his roster tag in Yahoo was really low. It was like maybe 10% rostered. So I think Perez may be one of the beneficiaries. And we know that AJ Hinch, like he's one of those, he wants a different lineup card every game. I get that. But I think Perez may be somebody who is batting leadoff. And they don't really know what to do with Riley Green. Sometimes he hits first, sometimes he hits second, sometimes he hits third. He's been, I'd say, a minor disappointment this year, although I still like Riley Green in the long term. But if you're looking for a pickup in Detroit, I think Perez makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree there. His contact metrics stand out to me. Before we get into some of our early season surprises, the biggest stars battle on the clay courts of Roland Garros for a chance to be crowned a Grand Slam champion. You can stream the French Open on Peacock today through June 9th. That's the whole tournament. Was able to watch what might be Rafael Nadal's last French Open match. That was a really good match against Zverev. Unfortunately, the rain today on Wednesday has kind of delayed a lot of what we're seeing, but there's a great match going on right now. For my fellow Polak Iga Swiatek and Naomi Osaka, they're in the third set, as our producer Adam has let us know. So that's an interesting match, which will be over by the time you listen to this podcast.
Favorite tennis player of all time?
I was a huge Agassi fan growing up. So it might be Agassi. I also, it might be the one. It might be Agassi. I've always been a big Gael Monfils fan. I just like the energy he brings to the game. And, obviously, like, much respect to Federer and Nadal and all those guys. I didn't not like them. But, Agassi for me.
Yeah, I'm probably Agassi, too. And not the early, images, everything Agassi, but more the, he just admitted, look, my hair is gone. I've been faking this forever. He just, I like players who have long rallies. And Agassi was one of those guys. Michael Chang was one of those guys, just the backboard. The whole idea with Agassi, the great return to serve, the great ground strokes, obviously Federer. If I had to watch one player and I wasn't emotionally invested just on an endless loop, it might be Federer because he was just so elegant.
Sure.
Just a grace and just a beauty which he played. So he's probably, I never felt, the thing with Federer though, is I never felt invested when he won or he lost. I just loved watching him play. It was like,
he was just great.
Listening to the greatest, violinist in the world or whatever. I wasn't winning or losing. I was just enjoying it, but with Agassi, I actually cared. And I always felt when he got up against like a Sampras that he was always the underdog and I didn't expect him to win, but if he did win, I would be happy about it. So I'm probably an Agassi guy too.
I also really liked Malavi Washington, who was like a New York native, Glen Cove, Long Island. He got up, I think, into the top 15 at one point. And then I was in the women's. I was a big Amanda Kutzer fan because I think she was like 5'1", South African, but she kind of like flew all over the court. And I was a fan of hers growing up as well.
Yeah, covered a lot of tennis growing up. It's a great sport to watch, and
I try to go to the U.S. Open every year.
Right. One reason why I love golf and I love tennis so much is these are sports where it's you. There's nobody else. There's nowhere to hide. There's nobody to blame. You are nakedly out there for the world. Your own abilities, and it's why they're so and obviously why there's so much up and down with these players, with injuries and with emotional stuff. Sometimes it's just it's such a great drama. And so I hope people get a chance to check out some of the French Open, because any golf or tennis major is always unbelievable theater.
For sure. Yeah. Check it out on Peacock. We'll touch base before we get to our early season surprises on just like your takeaways from your own teams and your own performance 1/3 of the way now through the season. What have you learned? What do you think you're doing well, not well, etc.?
I think I feel validated that I acquired my bullpens on a budget and I didn't pay up for the high end. And look, let me just say this. I always say any strategy works if you pick the right players, and any good strategy can fail if you pick the wrong players. So if you said I'm going to go after pitching and you pick the right guys, you're feeling great right now. But I'm glad that I did go bullpens on a budget. I always think that's a reasonable way to play. I wish I had been a little bit more platoon sensitive. We mentioned Kerry Carpenter earlier. not that I have Carpenter everywhere, but him and Kelenic were two players who I have on a couple of teams where I wish I had been more sensitive to the fact that they might not be playing every day. And at least with Kelenic, I kind of punted early on. I've been holding Carpenter and trying to mix and match the schedule, and he's actually been good against righties. That's the frustrating thing with Kelenic. He's just not hitting, or not hitting the way I was hoping. But I wanted to be more platoon sensitive, and I'm still trying, Eric. I don't know if this is a fool's errand or not, but I'm still doing that Logan Webb thing where I'm trying to figure out, is there a safer pitcher? Is these guys who don't throw in the high 90s, maybe they can be more durable long-term? So I'm hoping there's something to that, but I can't say it with any 100% conviction.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I leaned into, the injuries with some of with not like my first picks. Like I had a lot of like Luis Castillo, guys like that early on because I thought they were dropping. But look, I have a lot of Chris Sale, and I was in on him at the beginning of the year, and because I was just like, I don't know how long he's gonna last, but I think it's gonna be really good when he's out there. And I think that still is the same issue, right? We don't know how long he's gonna pitch for this year. He's pitching great right now.
As a Red Sox fan, I don't know how you could have drafted him. I'll take like 5 L's on Chris Sale because I was never picking him, and he's going to be one of the. I'm going to look at the Yahoo MVPs. He's going to be very high up there as one of the right answers. Where if you took this guy, you got an SP1, and he might have gone in a double-digit round in some leagues. So if you look at the Yahoo MVPs, Ranger Suarez, of course, Ellie De La Cruz. Yeah, Chris Sale is third on that list, and the fourth guy I want to mention, Jose Ramirez, is fourth on the Yahoo MVPs. These are the players who show up the most times in the top 500 Yahoo leagues. Jose Ramirez. I thought Cleveland's lineup was going to be mediocre at best and maybe terrible. It's like the third best offense in baseball. Talk about getting something wrong.
Yeah, they've been very impressive. I will say, like, from my teams, I'm coming out with an article tomorrow on NBC Sports that looks at my early performance, and I would encourage people to look at that, not to see how I'm doing, but I think just like it's a good exercise also to walk through, like, what did you do right, what are you doing wrong, and how are you adjusting. And I have the teams that I'm doing well in so far this year. I noticed I hit on my pitching, which is obviously a thing that's going to happen. And I have always been a proponent on taking late round dart throws on your pitchers, a lot of them, and seeing who hits. And so on a lot of like the teams where I'm doing really well, it's because my late round picks were guys like Jared Jones, Tanner Houck, Cutter Crawford, things like that, where it's like, okay, so I was able to withstand, if I had any early season struggles, I was able to withstand those from some of the other pitchers. And then like I reacted quickly on the wire to some things in those leagues, like picking up Jose Caballero right for the start of the year when I saw a playing time opportunity, adding Wilyer Abreu when the Red Sox said, we're going to play him every day against righties. And those guys have panned out. And so I think it's starting to cement this idea for me of like, I'm pretty good at late round starting pitching. I keep attacking that, knowing that if I don't wait on early hitters, if I really go after an early hitter, there's a chance I'm going to lock in on some guys. Like I have Jurickson Profar in a couple leagues where I didn't know. That wasn't like I thought this was going to be real. I just said, he's playing well right now, I'm going to add him. And then when he's not playing well, I'll drop him. And it just has happened that he's been playing well for almost 2 months of the year right now. And so when you take those gambles early on with hitters, and you churn like that, you have the opportunity to get lucky. And I'm going to fully admit that like some of those pickups are luck. Like the Jurickson Profar pickup is luck. I didn't see anything that made me think he was going to be better than he's been in the past. I scooped him and crossed my fingers.
I love so many of the things you're saying there. Give yourself a chance to get lucky with late round pitching, because we know pitchers, it's a butterfly. You can swing the net as much as you want, and the butterfly's going to dip. These guys are always adding pitches, subtracting pitches, new team or organization, new catcher, new pitching coach, working from the stretch, working from the full windup. You always do all those articles about pitch mixes and how they're constantly evolving. And then you have guys, a lot of the guys in that Red Sox rotation were popping at the end of last year. And, I think Cutter Crawford was kind of like by the end of draft season, I'm like, I have a lot of Cutter Crawford. I wish I had more of him, but it felt like kind of an obvious setup. But give yourself a chance to get lucky with some of these guys. Jared Jones was guaranteed nothing. He's obviously been a big hit. And you talk about just what you know and what's in front of you. Just trust what you see right now, and however long it lasts, it lasts. Profar is a great example of that. Somebody like Brice Turang, right? Early on, stealing a lot of bases. Okay, just you jump at that, and you think, okay, maybe he solidifies a job. Maybe he moves up in the lineup. These things have happened. He's ended up being, again, he's on that Yahoo MVP list. He's maybe 12 or 15 down, but you want to be, we always talk about the bottom of your roster being fluid, but the best time to make a good pickup obviously is early in the season, because if you get a guy who has staying power, you may have found a 4, 5, 6 month solution. It hurts that I don't have Profar, because we talked about post type guys. He was the number one prospect in baseball once upon a time, get injured a bunch of times, bounced around organization to organization. I'll always feel that him moving to so many different defensive positions at times hurt his offense. Finally, he's healthy. He's in one position, and who knows? I mean, I don't know. I can't guarantee you Profar will be good for 6 months, but he's always had the talent, and now he's just in one spot, one lineup, one glove. He doesn't have to worry about coming to the ballpark, is he in the lineup or not. And I'm really happy for him. I'm getting nothing from it myself, but he's the type of player where ask what's possible and don't look for a reason. Look for the plausible upside a lot of times to pick up these guys, knowing that many of them will fail and you'll end up cutting them for somebody else anyway. But I think the process was there for Profar, no matter how it turned out. In this case, it's been a hit for you, and I'll always support that idea as a good way to play fantasy.
Yeah, and if you look at, Profar is one of the guys on our list of early season surprises, so we can jump right in on that. If you look at what he's doing this year, nothing drastic stands out that's like, this is a completely different player, right? He is swinging a little bit less, but swinging a little bit less in the zone, but is making more contact in the zone. So maybe he's just like being a touch more selective, but again, it's minimal here. It's not a crazy thing. He's pulling the ball way less than he has in the past, and his line drive rate has gone up while his fly ball rate has gone down. So this might just be a guy who's just trying to hit the ball, hard where it's pitched. A 5.5% barrel rate is not really great, but it's the second highest of his career. And his average exit velocity is the highest it's ever been. And so you look at that 323 average, and sure, it's probably elevated over what it should be, but it's also connected to just trying to hit pitches hard where he's being pitched, not forcing something to the pull side. And so maybe he doesn't reach 15 homers like he had in 2022, although he already has 8, so he very well could. But I would be surprised if he, from here on out, so not even end of the year, but from here on out, hits 270, 280. And you're looking at a guy who's up over 280 at the end of the year. Like, I think there's enough legitimacy in what he's doing, where if you need batting average and you need some counting stats, because he is hitting third every day in the Padres lineup, like, I don't think this is all smoke and mirrors. I don't know how much power you get the rest of the year, but the rest of it, I think, is legit.
I love players who have walk strikeout rates that are close to 1. He's got 30 walks against 33 strikeouts. And man, I would have lost every bar bet in the world if you would tell me, okay, at 2 months into the season, there's going to be 3 Padres who have OPS pluses basically better than league average. And 2 of them are going to be Jurickson Profar and Jake Cronenworth, who I loved a couple of years ago. And I just basically, I did actually add him in a couple of leagues where he was available when he got off to a good start. But, Machado hasn't been good, and Bogarts has, been hurt now, but he's had an absolute lost season. I had to drop him in a couple of leagues, which was not fun. But I'm with you that I think Profar, I get the people who might say, oh yeah, sell high in Jurickson Profar. It's like, well, yeah,
what are you getting?
Well, you get it. What's the market for him? Right. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing. But there are those guys. I love that you brought that up, because there are some guys where it's like, you don't have to turn every hot start into trading him for somebody else. At some point, you just hold the player as long as they're playing well and then cut them, because nobody is looking at Jurickson Profar and thinking, oh, this is a breakout, a late career breakout. I need to get him. So you're not going to get much, right? And if maybe you're dying with pitching and you want to trade Profar for like a Michael Wacha type in a deep league or whatever, something to that extent, like, sure, but you don't have to actively try and trade all of these guys. You also brought up Brice Turang. I just want to ask you, do you feel like this is legitimate? Brice Turang is another guy who in the preseason, some people thought he was going to get sent down, or he was going to be in a platoon, or, something, not obviously as a full-time player, but he's out here hitting 294 with 19 steals through, 50 games, and is giving you a lot of fantasy value.
I think it's legit. The leagues I have him, I'm not looking to trade him. He good defender, gets on base. Obviously, it's never been an easier time to steal bases, and that's something that they want to do. I love the promotion in the lineup. Yeah, I'm a solid hold for me on Brice Turang.
Yeah, I think this was an example of, like, you looked at the 218 batting average last year, but it's like he hit 286 and 298 in back-to-back AAA seasons. He is a high contact rate hitter. His swinging strike rate, even last year when he didn't have a good year, was just 8%. It made no sense that he was going to be a 220 hitter. And so it made sense that he was going to be batting average and speed, and that's what you're getting. And sometimes I think he's a good example of, like, we let the preseason talk influence us a little bit. Is he going to play? Is he not? Oh, Sal Frelick's playing the infield, so Turang may not, play the infield as much. And sure, maybe the Garrett Mitchell injury shook everything up a little bit, but I also think we overreacted to hypothetical discussions that were happening during spring training.
Fair point.
One hypothetical discussion in spring training was that Jordan Westburg may be the odd man out in Baltimore because they had Jackson Holliday and they had Kobe Mayo, and they could have an infield of Gunnar Henderson and Kobe Mayo and Jackson Holliday. And Jordan Westburg has been a little bit of a breakout player for Baltimore this year. As of right now, he's cooled a little bit in May, but on the year he's hitting 291 with 8 home runs, 34 RBIs, 5 steals. Are you buying this new level for Jordan Westburg?
I am, and he's been one of the more inexpensive ways to get exposure to this Baltimore lineup. And I like that he's been good long enough now that I feel like he's got solidification in the lineup. If somebody hits for 2 or 3 weeks, that's nice, but the thing you always have to worry about with Baltimore is there's always a good prospect behind you or somebody coming up who could maybe usurp you. I feel like Westburg has done enough now that I feel confident he's going to get 550 or 600 at bats. Yeah, this is a solid hold for me too on Westburg. And I wish, unfortunately, I only have the one share. In one league where I got really lucky with closers, somebody had a bunch of good hitters. They needed a closer, and they offered me Westburg for Kyle Finnegan, about maybe a month ago. It's been a trade it's been good for both of us. But so I have one share of Westburg. I wish it were more than that, but I think he's going to be a 6-month fantasy relevant player.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was doing the recaps, the Rotoworld recaps for the Orioles game the other day when he had 2 hits. And so I was looking into what he's doing. I do think that, like, what he's doing in May might be a little more indicative of who he is long-term. I mean, he's hitting 278 in May, 3 home runs in 24 games as opposed to the 5 in 27 and the 303 batting average he had at the start of the year. There's a decent amount of swing and miss in his game, nothing crazy, but, he does have a swinging strike rate that is around 13%. So I think a 270, 280 hitter is probably more like what Jordan Westburg is. And I think, the power surge he had at the beginning is great, but he's probably cap out at like a 20 homer bat. So you're looking at a 270, 280 hitter with 20 home runs who will, push 10 steals, and that's super valuable. I don't think, what people saw early in the season and they were like, oh my God, this is like a full-on breakout. I think it is a great next level for him, and he is a clear fixture in their lineup. But I don't know that he's becoming like a next star for them. But again, that's still good for you where you got him in fantasy drafts.
Totally reasonable. I also want to give a plug to, so in the Yahoo game, when you click on any player's page, you have those Rotoworld notes, and the first tab is what just happened. Somebody went 2 for 4, somebody went 0 for 5, somebody got activated, somebody got hurt. And then there's that second box where there's kind of a check-in on what's up with the player. And those notes are so detailed. They're just the right length, right? Because you don't want them to be endless. You want them to be something somebody can read in a moment. But there's just so much nuance there, and it just gives you a great check-in with you. I'm always clicking on those tabs and figuring out, because I don't have time to watch all 30 teams intently. We all have teams we watch more than others. the Tigers games are always, if I'm in a bar or playing poker in Michigan, the Tiger game is always on. So I can tell you everything about the Tigers, but maybe I don't follow the Athletics as much as somebody else does. But the great thing is Rotoworld does. Rotoworld has basically 30 guys glued to every TV set. So I can't say enough how much those news tabs they're great. It's just a great check-in, a great reset on where a player is at and where the story is headed. And I think clicking on those tabs regularly, not just with your players, but the players you want to trade for, the players you want to pick up. I think it's essential to being a good fantasy manager.
Yeah, as DJ pointed out after the Mets doubleheader loss, like the only people watching the Mets games right now are people who lost the remote control and Rotoworld blurbers because we're just watching all the games.
Well, at least it's Gary Cohen, Ron Darling, and Keith Hernandez. So it's time well spent. And are they frustrated with this team too? I mean, you can see
sure
it.
They are. Every right to be.
Every right to be. That's why I love those guys, because they're not home. They are. Cohen does it right, and all those guys. They're you're around a team, you can't help care about the team and develop relationships. But if they stink, you have to say it. And those guys all are, they're professional journalists. And if the team plays lousy, they're going to say, hey, this is not acceptable. So they hit it right, where the tone is a little bit elevated when the team is playing well, but they don't lose their journalism integrity.
Yeah. I want to ask you, let's lump two guys together who are, I guess they're surprising starters only because of what they're producing based on where they were drafted. And it's guys who we've had interest in the past, Taylor Ward and Jeremy Pena, who are both way out producing their draft costs right now. Were you in on either Taylor Ward or Jeremy Pena coming into the year? Do you think that what we're seeing is a legitimate level of their actual talent?
No, I wasn't. In fact, in one league, one keeper league, we could have kept Pena very inexpensively, and we chose not to. And that looks like an enormous mistake. The Pena, I mean, he's hit 8 walks. The 308 average, I don't completely buy. He's somebody who actually I would try to not that people are banging on your door for Jeremy Pena, but I think if you made any kind of a trade right now that included Pena, and maybe it would be with multiple players, and I can hear Philip Seymour Hoffman saying you traded Pena, but I feel like you could get more. His face value stats right now would probably get more return or more respect than they should. I don't think he's anywhere near this good, but maybe I'm just overcompensating because it's a call I got wrong in March, because we could have had him as I think a mid-20s pick in a draft league where, obviously his value is much more than that. But he's over his skis right now. I would like you. And again, I know there's not a huge market for Pena necessarily, but there's been enough disappointing players in the fantasy landscape that he'd be somebody I'd be trying to work into a trade and try to lock in those profits right now.
I will say Pena was a guy who was a swing change guy in the offseason that the Astros guy really kind of went in and revamped his swing. And I was curious, like, why would they do that? It was a swing he's had for a long time. But listen, I mean, it is working. I don't know if it's just the swing or it's the fact that, he's not getting so pull heavy in his approach. Maybe something with the swing plane is led to a lot more line drives this year. But he's making more contact overall, significantly more contact overall, more contact in the zone. So maybe there has been something with the swing change that has led to him kind of unlocking some of that contact level. Hitting 308 right now. I don't know if he's a 300 hitter, but like we saw him hit 260 last year when he wasn't playing particularly well. So if he settles in as a 280 hitter in the middle of a good lineup, I think that has some value. And then Taylor Ward was somebody I think we all believed in, and then he struggled and he got hit in the face last year, and so it didn't pan out. And I believe in the talent still. I think obviously the team context is a little bit different without Mike Trout there, as we don't really know how long, what kind of RBIs runs he's going to get, or how long Taylor Ward stays with the Angels. And that's interesting too, is like, if they sell, which they should, he is a piece that, like, what if he got traded to the Braves, right? Like, there's interesting opportunities where Taylor Ward could move, to a contender and be pretty solid.
Yeah, it's funny. You look at the Angels, and they have a bunch of guys who maybe shouldn't be hitting in great lineup spots on a good team. So many of their guys hitting in the top half of their lineup would be like great 7th, 8th, or 9th hitters for the Braves or something like that, right? I think Renjifo's like that. I think Taylor Ward's like that. And Taylor Ward's Baseball Savant page is just gorgeous because there's so many things pinned to the right. The batting average is completely validated. You get a bunch of metrics. A bunch of his hard hit metrics are really good. Also, Pena's, by the way, his His batting average is completely validated on Savant. Also, he has really high sprint speed. I've always felt like he doesn't utilize it as well as he could. I feel like Jeremy Pena, why couldn't he steal 30 to 40 bases a year? And that hasn't come to fruition yet, but he's going to steal some bases. But if I were a Major League Baseball GM on a contending team, there would be, and it sounds kind of backwards because the Angels aren't good. We know that. But there are 4 or 5 veterans on this team that are all in the middle to second half of their careers that would make great sense as a helpful piece, right? We're just looking to supplement. We're just looking to add to this team on the second half or on the back end of it. In the case of Rengifo, he plays all over the field too. But if Taylor Ward isn't traded this season, then either a contending GM has dropped the ball or the Angels front office has maybe they get crazy about what they wanted for these guys, because they obviously are in the case of a rebuild, in the midst of a rebuild, and they need to start acquiring assets for the next great Angels team. And maybe Taylor Ward isn't on that team, but I agree with you. A great target for a contending team in a trade. A lot of guys on the Angels fit that profile.
Yeah. 2 more hitters we'll get to here. One is a guy I tweeted out something about in the beginning of the year and was panned for tweeting about Brenton Doyle's plate discipline, because I was suggesting that, he was making improvements in the second half of last year. Some metrics supported it, some didn't. And my thing was like, if he could just become a 250 or 260 hitter with his speed, because last year he stole 22 bases in just 126 games. Like, I thought that he could be an interesting late round flyer. He's hitting 263 with 14 home runs. He has cut down on his chase rate. So his zone contact rate is up. He still has a little bit of a swing and miss issue, but that's why he's hitting 260 and not 290. I do think that there's legitimacy here in that, like, Brenton Doyle is a 250, 260 hitter who's going to play center field every day for the Rockies because he plays Gold Glove caliber defense. And he may end the year with 12 to 15 home runs and 30 stolen bases with a 250 or 260 batting average. And that is a entirely usable, fantasy-friendly profile to have. And I think it's legitimate.
I mostly do. I get a little bit nervous, and I know this is maybe arbitrary sample size, but I think he's a 198 average over the last month. He's continued to run. And obviously we it's before the year we talked about, and during the year even, we talked about just this Colorado lineup is a lot thinner than we're used to. But if Doyle, he doesn't have to hit for that high of an average to have relevance, as you said. And maybe even if you told me he hit 245 the rest of the year, as long as he was playing in the defense will mark his territory, as you said, he's going to run a lot, and that would make him viable. And the other guy in Colorado, thankfully, I have some shares. It's kind of accidental because I didn't have high expectations. Ryan McMahon has never had an OPS
so
plus
good right now
of 100, and he's at 135. Now, granted, that's a park adjusted stat, so they kind of hold some of it against you for Colorado. He actually has better road stats than home stats. So Ryan McMahon's having a career year, and he's been quote unquote unlucky at home or unproductive at home, which doesn't make any sense. You would think that would eventually correct itself. He's been a right answer. And again, a player I drafted reactively, not proactively. One of those, it's the second half of my draft. He does play in Colorado. He qualifies a couple different positions. I'll pick up Ryan McMahon. I was really close.
He was the perfect, like, I know what I'm getting. It's not going to be exceptional, but I'll be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're getting something really good.
Now you're getting something better.
Great.
And also, the other thing too is, even if you told me the rest of the year he just went back to being the very consistent player he was in 2021, 22, 23, I would take that. That's still a usable fantasy player. And if he, God forbid, he comes close to what he's doing right now for the rest of the year, he'll be one of the top 10 right answers of the season.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's look at, I'm just curious, talk to me about 3 breakout pitchers and who you think, I guess, is the most legitimate of the 3. It's Ranger Suarez, Garrett Crochet, Luis Gil. All 3 guys way overperforming where they're being drafted. If you had to pick one where you're like, I trust this guy, this is who I want to kind of keep on the roster, who would it be?
As long as we don't have an innings concern, I actually think it's Gil. Man, Suarez is just hard to trust. That whip is so high. Maybe I'm also conflating because I have no Suarez anywhere, and he was drafted so late, and we know it's at a time where wins are going away from starting pitchers, and he just reeled off those 9 wins so quickly. Oddly, Philadelphia can't buy a win over the last week or so. Did they get swept in Colorado? I know they played very poorly in that series, but I would like any of them. And unfortunately, they're the wrong guys to trade for. They're more like, what do you do if you have them? I do not trade for these players because you're getting them totally at the wrong time because the value gets inflated. But I lean heel. I think they'll all be good the rest of the way, though. Crochet, I think, was gettable before the year. You outlined heel when he was first on the waiver wire front. I think the people who got Suarez kind of just got lucky with that. And I think he's maybe got the most collapse risk of the three. So I'm going to lean heel, but I think it makes sense that you lump them all together.
Agreed. I think people forget that we saw Ranger Suarez do this in 2021 when he moved into the rotation, and in 65 2/3 innings, he had put together a 1.51 ERA.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was like, man, this is a breakout. And then he had a 3.65 ERA in 2022, a 4.18 ERA in 2023. So he is very capable of having a good stretch. And I think that's what he's having right now. And so he's probably the most secure of those three. I think he just has the lowest ceiling of those three.
Again, we talked about the pitchers. What is really pitching, right? If you can, it's one thing if you got Mason Miller stuff, you just throw it over the heart of the plate, they can't hit it. But I mean, Ranger Suarez is doing this with an average fastball of 91.3. So I appreciate that. It's funny. It's like the only thing, he's not getting whiffs. He doesn't have a fastball that we can get excited about. It could get ticketed for speeding, but like every other of his sliders is just red. You know, I guess he doesn't do great in extension, but I don't even know if I care about that anymore based on some of the things we learned from that. But yeah, Ranger Suarez, Cy Young Award winner. Are you ready for that?
Cy Young, let's do it. We're going to move on to some guys who are disappointing us to start the year and wrap up that way. However, just real quick before that, I did want to point out, we don't have a lot of time to get into him, but David Fry, I just noticed David Fry dropped his O swing by over 17%. I know a small sample size last year to this year. Zone contact is up. Contact rate is up. Another guy whose pull rate is down and is just dry, and fly ball rate is way down. And he's just kind of driving line drives all over the field. That has led to home runs, but it also has led to an elevated batting average. I don't think he's going to continue at this level, but look, 17% walk rate, 19% strikeout rate shows that plate discipline, those plate discipline gains are real. And so I think there's some legitimacy to what David Fry is doing, and he's at least like in that Jurickson Profar tier for me of like, he's staying on my roster while he's doing this, and I don't know how long he's going to, but I think there are some changes he made that's leading to this.
It's a classic. Yeah, hold him as long as it works, but just it's a short leash for sure.
Yeah. Before we get to the disappointments, the LPGA Women's U.S. Open is here. Can Nelly Korda continue her historic run on the LPGA Tour? Find out this week when she competes against the world's best at the U.S. Women's Open, presented by Ally. Tune in Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC and Peacock. We got some disappointments. I'll go through the top two real quick because they're guys we've already talked about. Francisco Lindor has been a big disappointment. If you want to listen to last week's show, Scott and I talked about expecting a bounce back for Francisco Lindor. I know he then went out and watched a strike three right down the middle because he said he wasn't picking up the release point from the pitcher. We've seen hitters do that in the past. I know it's not a good look, but that shouldn't impact your desire to believe in a bounce back. Paul Goldschmidt has also really disappointed. We talked earlier in the year about him and how we didn't think it was him being toast. We thought he was struggling with breaking balls. He was struggling with his approach a little bit. And so he's already kind of turning it around a little bit. And so we're kind of seeing a little mini bounce back from Paul Goldschmidt. One player we talked about a little while ago who's bounced back a touch, but not to the level we expected, is Gleyber Torres, who even in the month of May, Torres is hitting 241. He does have 4 homers in May, which is great because he had none to start the year. 23 strikeouts in 25 games in May. It hasn't really been the like, hey, Gleyber Torres is a fantasy stud. Are you worried at all about him? It's a contract year. Is he pressing? Like, what's your concern level on Gleyber Torres?
Yeah, I mean, he's hitting 229, and Savant says he should actually be hitting 219. All of his hard hit metrics are down. The good news is that he's been around long enough that normally, if you were to just trust bounce backs for players who have the resume that he does, I think long term you would be way ahead. But I can't look at his. I just want to see that he's doing something well and he's not getting rewarded for it. I don't see any of that on his page. So I would not be. I'm not saying I wouldn't trade for Gleyber Torres. I'd be happy. I need the coupon. I need the discount. I can't. If anybody wants a proactive price on Torres, I can't place it.
Yeah, the frustrating thing is like, you can't point to one thing. He's not chasing more. His swinging strike rate isn't egregious. He's not getting like overly aggressive. He's actually like below MLB average in terms of his swing aggression. Pitcher List has like a decision value rolling graph. His decisions for the most part have been better than league average. Even when he's making bad decisions, they're better than league average decisions. The sad thing is like, there's a great rolling graph on Pitcher List of pitch hitability. So like how hittable are the pitches that you're getting? And he's getting really hittable pitches. So it's not even really the way he's being pitched. It's just he's not hitting right now. And so for me, that like gives me a touch of confidence in that like there are no red flags. The production just isn't there. But if you trust the hitter over the last few years, then I think you have to believe that he's going to figure it out. And so I wouldn't be opposed to trading for him if somebody really wants to get rid of him. But I'm not going to give up a lot to get him. But if the person who has him in your league is like, I got to get out from under this, I would listen to offers. I think there's going to be a better stretch coming. I really do.
Yeah, bottom line, you point to the resume. He's still just age 27, right? I still remember he was that hot prospect for the Cubs, I want to say. But yeah, I think your bottom line on that is reasonable.
I also want to ask you about Oneil Cruz, because he's another one who is disappointed in a way that I don't think is like super obvious. The 7 home runs look great. He's hitting 247. He's got a 35% strikeout rate. He has only 4 steals, so he's not running the way that people thought he would. In terms of Yahoo player raters or whatever, he's outside the top 200 so far this year in terms of his overall production. I know there was some concerns about him in terms of his over aggressiveness and just how much he was going to hit. Do you have concerns about the like upside, the star power of Oneil Cruz?
2 problems here. One, it's really difficult to strike out 35% of the time and carry value. And he's not running. Man, it feels so long ago when it was like Ellie De La Cruz, Oneil Cruz, pick, choose your weapon, right? 2 guys, similar names, these gigantic shortstops, same division. And Ellie, of course, is still a work in progress. There's things he does very well. There's things he doesn't do very well. He's also always going to strike out a lot, and he's still doing that. But with Cruz, we know when Cruz makes contact, I mean, the ball screams. We get that, but he's just striking out far too much right now for me to believe in him.
Yeah, I will say, like, I love using the rolling graphs on Pitcher List because I can see that, like, the swing decisions he's making are getting better of late. His contact ability is getting worse of late. And so you're like, what? How is that possible? And then you look at his pitch hit ability is getting much worse, meaning he's seeing far better pitches or pitches he can't hit as much. So maybe you're looking at like he's got a little bit of a cold stretch right now, potentially because of the caliber of pitching he's seeing. His performance was getting a lot better until maybe a week ago. His swing decisions were getting a lot better. So I would like to believe he's still trending in the right direction. We know he like broke StatCast the other day with that 3 hit game where they were all over 115 miles an hour. But I do think, to your point, like I think the swing and miss will always be there. And I don't know that he's going to run the way that we thought he was going to run. So even if he improves, you may be looking at a guy who's a 260, 270 hitter who will steal 10 plus bases in a year on a very mediocre offense. And so I really do think that caps his fantasy upside. Like we know the power potential is there, but unless he's going to hit 30 home runs, if he's only going to steal 10 bases and hit 270, it's hard to envision him as like that 5th, 6th, 7th round pick anymore.
And it's frustrating because on any given night, Oneil Cruz can be like the best highlight in baseball, right? I mean, he's just such amazing tools. But right now, it's more tools and not enough toolbox.
Yeah, and Eno Saris brought up a great point on rates and barrels the other day. Is like he has platoon splits, but and the Pirates already sit him often against lefties, but because he's their shortstop, they will play him often enough. If he ever moves to like third base, where you don't see shortstops platooned as often because that defense up the middle is valuable, but his defense is below average, and if they move him off short and he doesn't hit lefties, you could be looking at a future where Oneil Cruz is a third baseman who only plays against right-handed pitching and doesn't steal bags. And now all of a sudden, he's in a clump of players, and he probably wouldn't move to third because of Ke'Bryan Hayes. But if you move him off of short because of his defensive issues, maybe they move him to right field. Who knows? I mean, it changes his outlook a little bit in a way that makes me think that I'm not out on him, but I'm less optimistic of him reaching the ceiling that I think we thought he had before.
Yeah, I was curious where he would move, because Hayes, I had thought, and I just double checked this. He was signed to that extension, and he's a fantastic defense. He's like a yearly Gold Glove. He's basically going to be the heir to the Nolan Arenado Gold Glove conveyor belt. Now that, and Arenado, by the way, I don't think he's on our rundown. He's another guy who's been a disappointment. Just the whole Cardinals team, it feels like, has been a disappointment. But what do you do with Oneil Cruz if he's not a shortstop? This is like, when Keith Law does all those prospect ranks and everything, or anybody who's in the prospect game. We have a couple of great prospect writers over at Rotoworld. So many of these guys come up as shortstops. Can they stay at shortstop? Right. That's the big question. And I think we always thought Oneil Cruz could stay at shortstop, but maybe he can't.
Yeah, it's true. I know you had mentioned Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I did just want to point out, like, the reason I left him off, he's hitting 382 in May, in 23 games in May. The power hasn't come, but I think you and I have addressed that a lot on this show, that I think we need to settle into the understanding that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a good batting average hitter. He's going to hit around 290 or better. He's probably just a 25 to 30 homer hitter in the long term. I believe, at least. But and he doesn't run a lot. But I think there's still value in a guy who's going to hit, 290, 300 with 25 homers, 30 homers. It just might not be, hey, he's a third round pick type of value.
Right. But it's so many ground balls too. One of the things I wanted to say earlier too, you mentioned not running. One of my takeaways was that I think going forward, and I always did this before in fantasy, and I moved away from it, is I want to get as many broad profile players as I can. I want almost everybody on my team to run unless they are mammoth in other categories, and maybe move away from, and I know we talked about Pete Alonso favorably not that long ago, but maybe I just don't want as many guys like Pete Alonso who, okay, he's not going to run at all and he's going to hurt my batting average. Yeah. So there's two categories I'm dead at. And maybe I want to, like Maikel Garcia in Kansas City. It's like, okay, I'm more likely to accept the guy who doesn't have a ton of power, but it might be 15 to 18 homer power, but he's filling every other category in a plus way. He's helping me in multiple, there's more paths for him to have fantasy relevance. I think next year I'm going to try to, if I have 13 or 14 offensive slots, I'd like 8 or 9 of those guys to run. At least some, double-digit steals are in their range of outcomes.
That was why I was taking Bryce Harper at first base. He only has 3 steals so far, but I felt like of the first baseman, he gave me the best shot of getting 10 steals and not having a 0 in that.
What's hard about that with first baseman is just sometimes you have like the Freddie Freeman season where it's like, oh, I'm going to steal 15 to 20 bases. No, right. I'm just not going to run at all anymore. And it's hard. Kyle Schwarber a couple of years ago stole 10 bases, and then I think the next year he had 0. So sometimes non-traditional stolen base guys, for some reason, especially when they get into the second half of their careers, those stolen bases can float away. But I still do think Michael Salfino, my podcast partner for many years at the Breakfast Table, has always said the good thing about guys like that who are chip-in steals is that the market doesn't make you pay for them for that skill. It's kind of like a tack on. It's like a bonus. It's a free gift with purchase. So bottom line, I think more often than not, that's a good way to approach things.
Yeah. Let's wrap up with, I'm going to give you a list of guys, 5 guys who have been discussed ad nauseum for their struggles. So we don't really want to go into each of them in detail. But I just want to know if any of these guys you're actually worried about. It's Austin Riley, Bo Bichette, Randy Arozarena, Alex Bregman, and George Springer. Do you have legitimate worry about any of those hitters?
I cut Springer in the league like 3 or 4 days ago, and he's actually shown signs of life since then. But Springer, followed by Bregman, who homered yesterday. I wrote an article about how so many corners were disappointing. Bregman was on that list. Freeman was on that list. I think like 5 of the guys I mentioned end up having good dibs on Tuesday, whatever. It's a long season. But Springer's the one I'm most worried about, followed by Bregman.
I agree with you. I think Springer in a 12-team league, I could see moving on from. In a 15, I still think there aren't massive red flags blaring of any of these guys. Arozarena always had a profile that concerned me. So, but in terms of his free swinging ways, but he made it work, and so I just kind of always assumed he would make it work. And maybe he's not making it work right now. I don't know how to rectify that. But I would say I'm not terribly concerned about any of these guys. I think that Austin Riley is the only one that I feel confident will get close to his preseason value. I think the other guys are all going to disappoint in terms of where we drafted them to be, what we drafted them to be. But I don't know that they're going to be bad in general. And the Bichette thing for me is just, I think his approach where he can hit everything, so he swings at everything, it's just going to limit his home runs. And he's not running as much as before. So that even though he's a good player and a good hitter, that will just limit his fantasy value because I don't think you're getting the power and the speed that you thought you were getting.
Man, there's somebody in a dynasty or keeper league who probably had Guerrero and Bichette locked up a few years ago. I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to dominate this league for the next 10 years. It's not that they're bad, but I thought they were going to be like first round staples, and they're just not those players right now.
To me, maybe it's, who knows? Maybe it's coaching. Maybe it's approach. We don't want to blame that, but it's possible. We'll have some more positive conversations next week. Actually, I'll be gone next week. It'll be you and DJ back in the saddle again. The duo reunited. You can ask Scott and I a bunch of fantasy questions on Twitter if you need to. You can reach me at Samski NYC. Scott is at Scott_Pianowski. If you can rate and review this podcast, it really does go a long way to kind of having people find it and getting this podcast out there. So please do that. And DJ and Scott will be with you next week on the Rotoworld Baseball Show.